welcome back to the Hominids podcast.
Hi guys.
Yeah. Okay, so firstly, we'd like to put in like a formal apology for
Yeah.
to our fans who are just really just us, want to listen to our voices over and over again. But yeah, we're really sorry. Malka had exams and I had
My
IB
bad.
work. Arguably,
Yeah,
internal assessments do take up a long time as well. So
Okay, yeah, for sure. So like we were
yeah,
both busy with the international baccalaureate. And
baccalaureate.
and so and so we weren't able to record our next podcast, but this one's gonna be super exciting because Shividya planned it, and Shividya is
Yeah,
really good at planning these things.
You know how, I mean, I definitely did not like sit down like a minute before just going like speed running it. Definitely.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
So, shall we proceed?
Yeah, we
Okay.
shall. So, do you want to introduce what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah. So I planned the episode to like sort of revolve around mythology, and this idea came up when I was reading. So from my personal statement, UCAS, yeah, you girls going university.
Period.
Yeah, so I was writing my personal statement about like gender, mythology, stuff like that. And I was thinking, so I was reading a few research papers on it. So I was like, okay, so there's a lot of influence mythology has over our day-to-day lives, right? Oh, so just before I proceed, if I cough or like clear my nose, it's because I'm sick with like allergies. And yeah,
Sucks to suck.
okay, I see how it is. Anyway, my mom said she wants to listen to this episode later, so
Oh, wow.
that was not getting edited out, by the way. So
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, she loves me anyways.
sure. So anyway, moving on. It's the impact mythology has on our day-to-day lives is sort of like you don't realize it because you hear these stories as you're growing up from your parents, from your grandparents, or from your teachers even, and you sort of take up this role of being the main character, making the decisions like the main character would. You would also have like your favorite myth or some myth that you resonate with the most. So I thought this is something like a really good topic, like mythology in general. It's something we can discuss in more depth. So one thing is like what are some myths that you sort of resonate with or like connect with?
So, I think, like, growing up, I heard a lot of myths, like, religious myths. So, like, I follow Hinduism, which is, like, the predominant, like, religion in India. And so I since I was like growing up like abroad and like outside India, my parents tried their best to like make me like connected with that side, and like especially through like not necessarily religion, but at least like the cultural like beliefs and myths that we have. And Hinduism like is like a big part of our culture. And so I grew up like reading myths and like listening to myths about like great epics and stuff that happened supposedly like in our like Hindu mythology. And so like for example the Mahabharata or the Ramayana are like two like great epics or like wars that happened, and I grew up like listening to those. And then our religious text, the Bhagavad Gita, is like written based off of one of those. And so it's like really interesting because our religious text is actually like a story, and it's one of our gods like giving life advice to this other guy before the war. And so it's like really interesting, and it's like such an integral part of like how I understood life, I think. And like also it was just like, I don't know, it was a really fun story. So it's like I learned a bunch of life lessons like indirectly through like a really fun like story. But yeah. What about you?
For me, there was obviously the whole like I grew up in Brunei and Malaysia, and there was like a lot of Indians in those places, and I follow Hinduism as well, so we celebrate a lot of festivals together. So there was also like my dad would like explain all these myths to me, but one thing that like I just remember really well is whenever we visit Hyderabad during the summer breaks, I remember so I the house that we stayed in. We stayed with my grandfather on my mom's side, and
Mm-hmm.
it would be like it would be me, my grandfather, my grandma, and my brother in the same room sometimes. And so my grandfather used to like sleep, like he would lie down in bed, and then he would like just like explain one myth every night. So we would always start out with the Dasavatar, right? The Dasavatar
Mm-hmm.
stories, like for 10 nights, and then move on to something else, like I don't know, like Krishna Lila or some sort of other story, right? And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
like it is really like the myth. I haven't really seen a direct connection, like a source of that. I know that it has impacted my life, but in a
Mm-hmm.
more like it's sort of like a core memory kind of way, because I'll like if I think of
Yeah.
mythology, I'll think of like those stories that my grandfather used to tell me. But yeah, so some common themes among mythology is like heroism, death,
Mm-hmm.
creation, like Noah's Ark, Midas, Diwali.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So it's
Yeah.
like these are there's a lot of like overarching themes around like these myths,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something that really impacts the human psychology and archetypes. So you can say that a lot of morals sort of get shaped by these myths, like the story of Icarus and
Mm-hmm.
human limitations. Like he flew too close to the sun, so his wax wings melted off. So it's like there's a lot of like references you can make in real life, right?
For sure.
So
For sure. Yeah.
yeah.
The thing is, like, I like going back to this like whole themes of of having like heroism and death and all that stuff. I feel like while like and as you were saying, like it impacted you more in like a core memory kind of way. I really agree with that because I don't think I ever like did anything in my life and I was like, oh, that's because I read this story and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
why like I'm making this decision. Like I never like had that kind of moment. I don't think it like ever like directly impacted me. I just okay, for me it was more like a cultural connection thing, but also I don't know, cause like as you were saying, like the story of Diwali and stuff, it kind of gives meaning to a bunch of like festivals that we have, and it's
Mm.
like symbolic, I guess. But I don't know to what extent like it directly shaped me as a person and the choices that I make. Because I think a big part of that is because of I don't know if this makes sense, but like the time gap in which like the stories are being told, because they talk about these themes that are like supposedly like immortal and like last forever, but I feel like in our society so much has changed with like wokeism and stuff like that, like where like the concept of a hero is becoming so different than what it was in like the
Mm.
olden days. And I think that like cultural constructs and social norms have become so different from like for like today than they were like ever, especially today because of like whatever like social media and stuff like that. And so because of that I feel like a lot of these things are like irrelevant or like not as relevant as they would have been in like any other context, because there's like yeah there's so much like stuff like cancel culture and like I don't know if like there's like a direct connection, but like yeah, that's what my thoughts are.
No, yeah, I agree with you, but I feel like you can look at mythology in like a different perspective as well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
this, the myth of Icarus flying too close to the
Yeah.
sun. We're not really going to have wax wings where we fly too close to the
Right.
sun or something, right? Or like having to break out of jail. Um, but you could think of it as like human limitations, like accept the fact that there are human limitations, work around the
Right.
fact that there are human limitations. Like say you're not. Oh, I'm saying this because I'm like very school academically driven at the moment, but say you're like doing really bad in a subject, your limitation is that you're not going to suddenly get the best mark in the next paper, right?
Yeah,
But like you can
that's true.
think of it as like improving to some extent. So it's like considering
Mm.
all those limitations, considering the fact that you need a work-life balance. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing was yeah, no, in our class in English, we were studying like a lot of myths through Carol Ann
Mm-hmm.
Duffy's poems. And so
Yeah,
we,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, have you,
The world's wife.
yeah, the world's wife. You guys
Yeah, yeah,
study
yeah.
that
We did
too?
that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, I find it really interesting because she takes the myth, writes in a woman's perspective, and then makes it like a modern setting, like today's world, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
that's like, when I was reading the poems, I was like, that's something that just really stood out a lot because it's like,
For sure.
while you think like mythology can be like something that can't really work in today's context, she made it in such a way that it does work.
Yeah, that's so true. Like so many of her poems are like, because like for example, for my like practice individual oral, I did Pygmalion's Bride, and that was like really interesting because obviously there's like the whole myth of Pygmalion, and she used so many like elements of that and like core elements of that story and that myth, but presented it in like a more modern way.
Yeah.
So maybe like it's less the actual myth, but more the way it's presented and the way it's interpreted that like
Yeah.
affects you.
Yeah, because like in Medusa, because I use this in every single one of my paper ones because it's somehow it's
Yeah.
relevant one way or the other. But in Medusa, she, what's it called? She makes that whole like turning things into stone thing as like a metaphor, and like the way she describes the stone just like reflects her emotions, right? And that's something
Yeah.
that like I found, like it's taking a myth, but it's not taking a myth necessarily. It's taking a message, and then putting it in a more contemporary context. So, yeah, that like brings me to this idea. Like, would you say modern literature can be a form of mythology?
That's an interesting question. That's a really good question because I think that technically anything can be mythology.
But we have like the schema that like mythology is something that happened so long ago.
Exactly. Because like I don't know, because mythology has such different like interpretations from different people. Like you could like even just like how we were talking, like for example, Duffy's poems talk about a non-religious type of mythology. It's just
Yeah.
like more a cultural kind of mythology, like from like the Greek mythology, whereas like me and you were talking about like Hindu mythology, and so like the mythology being religiously associated, I feel like gives it such a different like outlook and like different like interpretation. But I feel like that's why I think that like kind of adds to the whole thing that like mythology has to be super old, or like has to like come from like ancient learnings and stuff like that. But like if you, I don't know like what the actual definition of mythology is, right? But I think technically any story is a mythology, or it will be a mythology at some point, right?
Okay, so it says,
I don't know.
I just searched it up. Mythology, a collection of myths, especially one belonging to a particular religious or cultural tradition. But I feel like now, mythology has been more, while that is a definition for it, I don't think there's like a, because you can say like mythology is something that's just not necessarily true, but it has like a significance in some culture, and or in society, because the reason why there was culture is because that was a society at one point, wasn't it? It was its own society.
That's true.
So like you can take any fictional writing and just call that mythology, but then we don't do that, which is like, it really does raise that question, doesn't it? Because like, if you look at what we've written now and like thousands of years into the future, it would just look like mythology, wouldn't it?
True.
Like,
True. But would you say that a lot of like modern literature is as like widely read or like accepted? Like for example, I don't know, what's like a book that, or like a piece of writing that has been read by like majority of the people? Like I don't
To
know,
Kill a
maybe,
Mockingbird
like,
is a really popular example.
That's true.
And there's a lot of themes of like racism, I believe. And I haven't read it in a long time, but there's a lot of like themes of like social issues. And that's what you find in mythology as well, isn't it? Like greed, like in not Dr. Faustus, because that's not really myth, it's a play. yeah, so like Midas, it's like greed in um Noah's Ark, like the fact that no one else believed in Noah when he's like, okay, this
Yeah.
the God told me about this. That's
Mm-hmm.
one thing, like ignorance
Yeah.
and like
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it's
For
like a
sure.
lot of myths have like they sort of depict a social issue, don't they? And a lot of books also
Yeah.
do that, like books as in like ones that are written now. So
Mm-hmm.
to some extent, I would say modern literature can be a form of mythology, but it would be its own subcategory.
Mm. Yeah, I see that. I see that. I think that's so true. But yeah, I don't think it would be considered mythology like in our day, like right now.
Yeah.
Like I think maybe like 10 years or like more down
10
the line when
years.
it's like 10 years is like actually no, that's a lie. Like, I don't know, like 100 years,
10
100
years.
years,
10 years time, just
10
believe
years,
me. Like,
like 100 years down the line, or that's even too short. I don't know. That's the thing. Does mythology have to be old for it to be mythology?
I feel like people will only consider mythology if it's old.
That's fair.
Because I don't think it
That's
necessarily
fair.
has to be old. I think
Mm,
it just has to be significant, culturally significant. And
yeah.
a lot of literature today is culturally significant, but we won't consider it mythology because no
Mm,
one's been retelling it multiple times to the point where you're
yeah.
like, okay, it's a myth.
Yeah. There also like raises the question of like oral history, and like
Yeah,
history
yeah.
passed down like through like conversation and through like how your granddad used to tell you stories. Like he
Yeah.
didn't like write you a book and give it to you, but like
Yeah.
he told it to you like from his like perspective and his point of view. And so like, and another thing that like that made me think of was like traditions that we have like in our culture, because like, or like a global culture, like with globalization and stuff, like the tooth fairy,
Mm.
for example, is like something that is like, I mean, it was for sure like very isolated into like one specific culture, like some specific cultures at some point, but now because of globalization it's become like a global culture. Like I remember
Yeah.
my mom used to like tell me about the tooth fairy, give me a little coin each time my tooth fell out. And so it's like, is that considered mythology?
That could be mythology. That could also be a tradition. I'm not sure because it's like a very blurry line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's like
Yeah.
there's no specific like the tooth fairy. You lose a tooth, you get money instead, right? That could be considered a
Yeah.
tradition, but then unless there's a story behind why the tooth fairy gives you money and takes your tooth in return, I don't know how you would. That's the thing. Like, there's a lot of we could go on forever about this, couldn't we? About like the line
Yeah.
between mythology, tradition, and culture.
No, for sure.
Because you can say tradition and culture comes under tradition and mythology comes under culture, but then you can't really distinguish things between those. So it's like it's very
So
interesting,
could we then like redefine mythology as a way of explaining or justifying traditions and social norms?
yes. So that's one that's a discussion I was having with one of my friends, and so we were just like talking about I just mouthed who it was to Mark, and then I hope she got it, but I'm pretty sure she got it. She laughed. She knows.
I got it.
Yeah. So we were talking about like we were just having a discussion about like how different space related things and oh god, my nose is so congested. Okay. And we were talking about like how mythology at one point was just used to make sense of something, right? Like
Right.
Stonehenge, for example. No one knows exactly how those rocks were so perfectly placed, but you can find a lot of myths describing stories about that. Or formation of rivers would have been like there would have been some sort of what's it called? Some sort of myth about that, saying how it got how a river is formed. But then, as research went on, we learned. Another thing was I think there's an island in Indonesia
Yeah.
somewhere like Yogyakarta or something. So
Yeah.
I remember when I was younger, we went there, and there's this island right near a volcano. Oh, it was the volcano
Uh huh.
island. I don't remember, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
it was it was shaped as if like a woman lying on her side, and so they had a whole myth. Yeah. Sorry, my nose is just so congested from the allergies. They had a whole myth about how it's like an actual woman that was lying down, and like, everything grew, like the plants and everything grew up, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, that's something really interesting, right? Because like we like, what's it called? We fill in the gaps of knowledge we have with myths. And the other thing is, you can apply to you can apply that concept into science. The model
Right.
of the atom, no one has actually seen an atom, right? But we sort
That's
of
true.
like did experiments, and we built a story around the outcomes of these experiments to be like, okay, the atom has a nucleus with like protons and neutrons, and it has electron shells, SPDF orbital, stuff like that. So we sort of
Yeah.
like built a story around the experiments we've conducted in a way where all of it kind of makes sense, so all the gaps are filled in. But
That's true.
the second that it gets proven wrong, all of science just falls apart.
Yeah.
So I think
That's
that's
so
like
true.
in human nature, isn't it? To just like
Yeah.
build a story around something.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think like our constant like innate human like goal is to like understand the world around us, like
Yeah.
through whatever means that may be. Like any field, like especially like research fields. If you look at like, I don't know, like you want to do anthropology or like architecture,
Yeah.
for example, like what are those fields? They're just trying to understand like where we are, how we are, how we like why we are. Wait, what? Why we are how we are. That's the one.
Yeah.
And like I don't know, just trying to understand like the world around us, and the same goes for science. Like we just, and that like makes me kind of like low-key question the credibility of a lot of things, because like we tend to find conclusions and then find like a justification for how we got to that conclusion after we find the conclusion.
Yeah.
Like that's what science is. Like, we have a hypothesis always, and then we try to like justify like how we got there through like methods, or like we assume that we evolved from like monkeys, or like
Yeah.
and so but then we like kind of try our best to like find evidence for that through like a bunch of like fields and stuff, almost like we don't
Yeah.
believe ourselves enough.
It's like a demand characteristic, isn't it? We're looking for what we want, as opposed to,
Exactly.
because I think in 2015 there was a discovery of a new hominid called
Oh my
Homo naledi. Yeah. You do?
No, I'm just
Oh.
saying hominid, like the name
Oh
of
yeah,
our podcast.
hominid. Yeah, that's us guys. We're the Homo naledis. It was discovered in South Africa. So what happened was, up until then, we had like an idea of how migration patterns were, but once they dated that hominid, there's a lot of questions still about that hominid. Like no one knows enough about it, but
Yeah.
it's very interesting in the sense that like the fact that that one discovery of a new hominid has just changed archaeology altogether. Like that discovery sort of remapped migration, remapped how we perceived human evolution to have taken place. So it's just really like, the more we find out, the less we know, right? Because
Yeah.
we're like,
Yeah,
okay,
that's like the paradox of life.
yeah, exactly. And it's like, another thing is, while we do use mythology to like fill in the gaps, we've also accepted the unknown in different ways. Like you said the word paradox. We call everything a paradox that we don't know, right? Like the border paradox or the shoreline paradox or something. It's like you never really know the length of a border of a country, because you can look at it on like a map that goes like 1 to 1,000 ratio, right? And you can say,
Yeah.
okay, it's this big. But then you go deeper, and then you realize, no, it's even longer than that. And then you look at it from an atom level like measurement, right? And it'll be even bigger. And then you could look at subatomic particles, and that would be even bigger, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it never ends. So that sort of like that paradox we sort of just accept it as a paradox. But it doesn't mean we won't explore it further, but it means that we're more comfortable with not knowing that piece of information.
Yeah.
Another
That's
question
interesting, bro.
I had prepared was
Mm-hmm.
flaws in myths. Why?
Mm.
Like, we have all these myths, but
Yeah.
the main character, the person who's supposed to be like a role model,
Mm-hmm.
often has flaws as well. Like, you know, the Ganesh Chaturthi, um,
Mm-hmm.
Krishna is like, has a god complex, doesn't he? We all like look at him as a god.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah,
looks at
yeah.
the moon through the reflection of the milk. And so
Uh-huh.
he gets influenced into doing like, he goes and goes like, can you give me all your, like, I don't remember, was it jewels or something like that.
I think so. I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure, but
So
yeah.
he goes and just goes like, you should give me this. But then they go like, no. And then the guy's brother takes all those things out of the forest, and he gets eaten by a lion. But essentially Krishna just goes like, you should have given it to me because I would have taken care of it. Whereas initially the intention was to just take it for himself. So like, why do we
Yeah.
have flaws in the people in these myths? Why do you think that's it?
That's interesting. I think it like goes back to kind of like finding explanations for like the way people are the way we are. And I think it kind of, because like obviously like if you look at today's society, everyone is flawed, like everyone and their mama is flawed. But and so it's like, why is that? And it's like also kind of like saying, like teaching us a lesson, like moral of the story type shit. And it's like, oh, if you do this, something bad will happen, like and like also that goes back to like the whole religious myths thing too, because like obviously they're gonna try and make the god look better in the situation than like just the random old like normal guy.
Yeah.
And so and that's like again a way of like increasing devotion and like loyalty towards religion, which is a little bit messed up, but I guess that like kind of fulfills its purpose to some extent. But yeah, what do you think?
I think so. I'm thinking more along the lines of like Superman and Batman, right? You see how a lot of people are like, I'm Batman. They talk about Batman more, they look up to Batman more, because Batman is a flawed character, isn't he? Like, he does a lot of good, but you look at his backstory, it's not perfect. Superman, on the other hand, is just depicted as like this really perfect person. So I think like the fact that people can relate to the idea that people go through rough times, so like having flawed characters but still having like an overall good impact, right, is like will drive them to do the good part. Like, if someone's really perfect, you're not going to look at them and go like, I want to be like them. You're just going to be like, that's impossible. But if someone has a flaw
I get that.
and then they do something good, you're like, I can do that because I have a flaw, but I can still work around it if this person can work around it, right? Batman was able to do so much good despite the fact that his parents were killed, stuff like that. And I can still, so I can do whatever good I want to do in the world despite the fact that I've had these drawbacks.
Yeah.
So I feel like that sort of ability to relate to the character, not necessarily directly, but like the ability to relate to the fact that something bad does happen to people, would like drive them to look at the deeper message of the myth.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Another like thing I just like thought of when you were talking about this right now is like this whole Superman Batman thing. Do you think like that is considered a myth?
That's
Because there are people who believe in Batman, like seriously believe in him, or like like they're
It
So
is
it's
very
like,
culturally
I don't
significant,
know.
isn't it? Like Marvel, DC, and everything.
Yeah.
I feel like they
Yeah,
could
it
be.
really is.
They won't be considered mythology as we think of it, but you can look at it as mythology in a different subcategory. So it's like modern mythology, right?
Yeah, yeah, because again, it's an ever-changing concept, like
Yeah.
ever-evolving concept.
Because no one thought like that when they first came out with the story. When they first came out, no, when they first like retold the stories of like the Ramayana and stuff. No one went like, that's mythology. They just were like, okay, it's another story. And then the second it became culturally significant, that's when we started calling it mythology.
That's true.
There's so much we can discuss about this.
There really is. Yeah, it's a broad concept.
It is very.
But
there's like so many different ways you can look at it. But yeah,
yeah.
We are still trying to maintain like a similar time frame throughout all our podcasts. Because we don't want to make a really long one and then have to one up that for the next episode. It's hard enough already to find half an hour to like even do the to record this.
Yeah, low key, yeah. But you know what? We're gonna get more consistent over time. Our podcast like content is gonna evolve. It's gonna become more like, you know, like direct, streamlined, more like quality content because we're all learning together. Like we're all in this together.
Me, Malka, and me and Malka listening to this again. You know.
Yeah.
All
our two fans, which are ourselves.
Yeah. all four of us. You know.
Yeah.
The two of us in different situations, but you know, like all four of us are learning together. It's okay.
And that's okay.
That's okay. You know what? The only person you really need in your life is yourself.
Exactly. Because you are your biggest enemy and you are your biggest supporter.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right then.
All right. Let's wrap it up.
See you next time.
We will. Hopefully, it won't be another really long break. Like we promise, we'll get out a real episode. But I mean, not a real episode. A proper. We'll maintain a proper time.
Yeah. And hopefully next time me and Shivida will be in the same country. So we might try to do
a little teaser, if I may.
Yeah, little teaser. Anyways. So see you guys. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.